Because I remember watching that debate he did with Christopher Hitchens like many, many years ago. I think that was the first time I ever heard of Dinesh D'Souza. And yeah, I mean, my impression from that debate is that he seems like a bit too smart to be saying like, and that's not saying much, right? Given many of his claims, but like he seems too smart to be making some of the claims that he makes, which makes me think that some of it probably is like intentional pandering. Maybe not necessarily like super Machiavellian, but probably at least like he's knowingly saying stuff that he kind of probably internally eye rolls at a little bit, because I think he knows it'll help him like sell documentaries or books or whatever.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how this fall fits into it, but people in the chat are saying he also banged Laura Ingraham, so that's, take that.
It fits in somehow.
All right. Let's start his thoughts about David Hume and miracles.
I want to talk about miracles. Have you ever seen or witnessed a miracle? I haven't, but I know many people who have. They believe firmly that they have experienced a miracle in their lives, or they have been present and seen a healing, some kind of event that they would describe honestly as miraculous. There is no way this otherwise could have happened. They don't just mean it was an unlikely event, they mean it was a supernatural event. Now, the question I want to explore is whether miracles are invalidated, are made impossible by the fact that we live in a world that is determined, and I'm using that term also in its philosophical sense, determined by physical, scientific laws. Now, the most famous argument against miracles was given by the philosopher David Hume, and I'll come to that in a minute, because Hume is kind of the guru of today's kind of new atheists, the atheist camp, represented by people like Hitchens and Richard Dawkins. Here's Richard Dawkins talking about miracles.
Jay, could we pause
and
this
Richard
for a
Dawkins
second?
is responding to biologist Stephen Jay Gould.
All right. I just want to say really briefly that the new atheists would have been so much better if David Hume actually had been their guru.
True.
All right. I just, I think some, if I'd ever gotten the sense that like Sam Harris had read the, Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, that's, I think he would have been doing better. But all right, let's keep going.
By the way, Stephen Jay Gould had tried to make a sort of rapprochement, a healing between the scientific and the religious communities by saying, listen, the scientific and the religious communities are doing two different things. The scientific community pursues facts, and the religious community pursues values. And since facts and values belong to sort of two conceptually different camps, you can allow each group to kind of do its own thing. There's no reason they should be clashing or fighting with each other. This is the theme of Stephen Jay Gould's book called Rocks of Ages. Now, Dawkins, I think, very slyly notices that this doesn't really work. And Dawkins says, well, what about miracles? He goes, miracles are actually a claim, not just about values. You should be honest and truthful. Miracles are claims that some event occurred. This dead guy came back to life. This person with cancer was miraculously cured. And so, says Dawkins, there is now an overlap because somebody is claiming that this was done miraculously or supernaturally. And science, he says, shows that that cannot happen. Why? Because, says Dawkins, quote, science is based upon verifiable evidence. And miracles, according to him, are violations of the incorrigible, unalterable laws of science. Now, let's turn from Dawkins to someone who makes this argument in a more formal and sophisticated way, and that is the philosopher David Hume. I'm now going to sort of outline Hume's argument, and then I'm going to outline my refutation of it. Here's Hume's argument in 4 parts. Number 1, a miracle is a violation of the known laws of nature. Number 2, we know these laws through repeated and constant experience. Number 3, The testimony of those who report a miracle or claim to have seen a miracle contradicts the operation of known scientific laws. Therefore, number 4, no one can rationally believe in miracles. Basically, what Hume is saying is that someone says there's a miracle, even if they're a believable guy, not, habitually given to lying, you have to weigh the credibility of their testimony against the fact that we have literally millions upon millions of experiences that say the opposite. So a guy goes, I miraculously saw a guy with 3 eyes. You go, wait a minute. We've seen millions and millions of people all over the world, and everybody has 2 eyes. So are we going to believe this guy who says that he saw a man with 3 eyes? Or are we going to believe the accumulated weight of human experience as consolidated in the form of scientific laws that say that Homo sapiens, human beings, are born with 2 eyes? So this appears to be a kind of devastating argument against miracles, so devastating that many Christians have sort of cowered from it and run for cover. Here's the theologian Rudolf Bultmann now writing about a generation ago in the early 1960s. Bultmann goes, well, it is impossible to use electric lights and the wireless and to avail ourselves of modern medical and surgical discoveries and at the same time to believe in the New Testament world of spirits and miracles. So Bultmann is willing to give them up and basically say, well, maybe we should subtract miracles from Christianity. But I think we all know that you can't do that. Why? Because Christianity of all religions is actually dependent on miracles. It's the religion that relies the most on miracles, even more than Judaism. By the way, there are miracles in the Old Testament, but if you remove the miracles, the Old Testament would largely remain the same. The Jewish religion, Jewish faith, is not critically dependent on miracles, but Christianity is. Why? Because Christianity rises or falls on the resurrection, a miracle, a supernatural event. A man who was put to death by the Romans rose again. And of course, Jesus, as we know, performed a whole bunch of miracles. He brought the sick to life, and he made people who were lame walk, and he cured leprosy, and he did all this stuff. Even Islam, compared to Christianity, hardly depends on miracles. I believe in the Quran at some place Muhammad is associated with a single miracle, but just one. Again, if you remove the miracle, Islam remains largely the same. So let's now come back to David Hume's argument because it seems so unassailable, and I want to just outline my refutation of it, which I will develop in the next segment. Here's my refutation. A miracle is a violation of the known laws of nature. This, my first point, repeats David Hume's first point. The second point, scientific laws are, on Hume's own account, empirically unverifiable. What I'm saying here is critical. What I'm saying is that Hume forgot to read his own book. Hume's argument against miracles, by the way, is contained in a book called An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. But in another book by Hume called A Treatise on Human Nature, Hume himself explains why no scientific law is empirically verifiable and claims that, in fact, science has laws are themselves absurd. Now, it's important to distinguish here between 2 types of laws. I would call them mathematical laws on the one hand and empirical laws on the other. No one denies that mathematical laws operate by necessity. So 2 + 2 = 4. That will always be true. That is true by necessity. Pythagoras' theorem, that if you add the square in a right triangle, if you add the squares of the 2 sides, it equals the square of the long side. That's the Pythagorean theorem. It's always true. It's true by necessity. But let's take a different kind of empirical law. Light travels at a known speed, or E = mc², or Newton's square law. I'm going to show in the next segment that those laws, empirical laws, are not empirically verifiable. So here we go. Scientific laws are, on Hume's own account, empirically unverifiable. Thus, violations of the known laws of nature are possible. If these laws are unverifiable, obviously there could be exceptions to those laws, and therefore miracles are possible. The bottom line of it is there are some people who think that miracles are like old-fashioned. This is, people in the old days used to believe all kinds of stupid stuff. But as C.S. Lewis himself points out in a book called Miracles, Lewis says, hey, listen, don't think that ancient people were all that stupid. Ancient people knew that dead people don't come back to life. Ancient people knew how babies were made. They didn't think that, for example, you could be born of a virgin. So when these things happen in the ancient world, don't think the ancient people go, well, it could be the case. No, they knew that this was a scandalous departure from the normal patterns of nature. A miracle is a very irregular event. Even believers affirm that there is a pattern in nature, but there can be exceptions to it if God wills that there should be. That's the definition of a miracle. And as I'm about to show, such miracles are in no way inconsistent with any known laws of nature.
Okay. So, a lot going on there. First thought, does he have the argument right?
I mean, it was kind of it seemed like he misconstrued Hume a few times. I mean, I don't think the argument was exactly right. And also, I don't think his account of like Hume's view of laws of nature was exactly right either. I mean, he kind of appealed to like, this interpretation of Hume being like a regularity theorist about laws of nature or whatever, where like laws of nature are just like these highly, empirically confirmed regularities, but that there's no like, metaphysically robust underlying like principle that like makes this regularity or that like underpins the regularity. I mean, it's just kind of strange because like, I don't know, like even if you do take that view, like that was Hume's position on laws of nature, which is like very controversial in terms of like the exegetical debate about like what Hume thought. But like, even if you do think that, it's like he says, okay, according to Hume's own view, laws of nature are just regularities. There's not an underlying necessary principle there. So therefore it's possible to break the laws of nature. But like, Hume doesn't necessarily have to hold that it's impossible to break the laws of nature, as long as breaking the laws of nature is possible, but that the laws of nature are still these like highly empirically confirmed regularities. It would still seem like you would need to meet a pretty high burden of proof in order to show that the regularity actually doesn't always hold. And I think that's sort of sufficient for like Hume's argument against miracles to work. Like, I think he's setting the bar too high. Like, Hume has to prove that miracles are impossible. Like, no, he just has to claim that they're very unlikely. So our priors and like any given miracle claim being true should be really, really low.
Yeah, absolutely. That, I mean, something where I used to talk about this in the, when I was living in New Jersey and teaching at Rutgers in person, I did the, philosophy of religion class there and talk about this, and remember saying like, look, you can run a version of this argument for cases that aren't even technically miraculous, and because Hume's point, which I think Dinesh kind of said, it got a little bit mangled. I think somebody could definitely come out of that video not quite getting this. But like Hume's point is like, what you have to do is you have to compare how unlikely it would be that the speaker is saying something false with how unlikely it would be that somebody walked on water, for example, right? That kind of miracle. And even if the speaker is super duper trustworthy, it doesn't follow, like a super duper trustworthy person who doesn't seem to be crazy at all, and you've never known him to lie and all this stuff. A super duper trustworthy person suddenly lied or being deluded or whatever, like any of the scenarios whereby he says something false might be very unlikely, but it's not anything like as unlikely as somebody walking on water, right? So, and you could do that for completely non-miraculous cases. So the version I would give that is I would say, look, let's say, I don't know if this is true. I hope this is true. That you guys think I'm a really trustworthy guy. I wouldn't lie to you. You don't think I'm crazy, all that stuff. Nevertheless, if I came into class at the beginning of class and said, hey, last night, Vladimir Putin and former President Bill Clinton and the Pope all flew to New Jersey, and they had dinner with me at my apartment. Look, that's not even a violation of the laws of nature. That's just, that's just a completely physically and metaphysically possible, but just super duper unlikely event. And no matter how trustworthy you think I am, you probably still think that me lying, being deluded, playing a practical joke that would seem super out of character for me, whatever, like, would be way less unlikely than that thing happening. Never mind the laws of nature case, because you're saying, like, again, you don't need metaphysical impossibility. You can just say, like, given that, we have all of this evidence that every time somebody steps onto the surface of water, they sink, your starting line probability estimate for any particular example of somebody stepping onto the surface of a lake and sinking should be, if it's not 100, it should certainly be 99.9999999, and that whatever that leaves is much less likely than several people who are otherwise credible saying something false. That would be Hume's point, as I've always understood it.
Yeah, I also just found it puzzling that his example of a miracle was like a person with 3 eyes. I was like, that's kind of like a weird.
I'm not aware of like even physical possibility. Like, what law of nature does that break?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah,
I would just be like, what happened to this person? Let's do some investigations. Like, how this person got a 3rd eye? It doesn't seem. I don't know. Oh, but yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, the argument also just kind of seemed like one of those weird, I don't know if it's called arguments from ignorance or something. It's like, because it seemed like he was saying, because like if we accept his account of Hume's argument, it's just saying, well, it seems like Hume can't exclude miracles, but then he like jumps, so then he says, so that means miracles are possible, but like that leap is not justified, right? Like, just because you don't know something doesn't mean it's grounds for something being possible. It just means you can't exclude it, right? So it's like, and I think sometimes people make this sort of move, like kind of arguing from ignorance. It's like, well, if we can't exclude it, then maybe. And it's like, well, it doesn't actually tell you anything at all. It just means you can't exclude something, but that doesn't give you any reasons to think that it's possible at all. If that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah, it's also a little bit weird that there's the inconsistency claim about what Hume thought, and then there's we should reject this argument that he made, and those just seem like completely different things.
No, it's like, like his argument was like, okay, conditional on Hume's view of laws of nature being right, this argument doesn't go through. It's like, it's not clear that response is going to work against like the majority of people who don't accept Hume's view on laws of nature, like even assuming that was Hume's view. Like, that's a very controversial position. To be like this, complete Humean regularity theorist about laws of nature.
Yeah, how about the rest of us who think it is impossible to violate laws of nature, or that that's what we have evidence of? That if you have evidence that the special theory of relativity is true, then then that is evidence that it's impossible for anything to, in some deep sense of impossibility, for anything to accelerate faster than the speed of light. If that's your position, then okay. I mean, like, it seems like Dinesh's defense isn't going to hold any water. And even if it's not, I mean, who cares? I mean, it's like, I think Ethan's first point is still the most salient one, because it's like, even if you do accept, like, and again, I mean, anybody can, arguments aren't like attached to people, that, that it's not like you can't, David Hume is the guy who made this argument, so you can only make this argument if you agree with all of David Hume's other views. You could just, pick up the argument and, make it. So, like, whether it's inconsistent, whether one of the premises is inconsistent with one of Hume's other views is not obviously all that relevant to anything. I mean, the rest of us can still make the argument, who have the much more common view that you can empirically show that it's impossible to violate laws of nature. But again, going back to Ethan's first point, I don't know why we need to show that. Like, we could just say, yes, all of our evidence shows that dead people stay dead. So the prior probability of a particular dead person coming back to life is just fantastically low. And you know, whatever that's like, you know, Lucy is the most honest person ever. She, you know, she would never tell a fib, and you know, you can just tell how level-headed she is. And so, you know, Lucy says she saw the fairies in the garden, you know, like, or you know, Lucy says she saw the guy, you know, come back to life. Like, okay, I mean, you know, Lucy surprising you or doing something you think is really out of character for her is surely less intrinsically unlikely than dead people coming back to life.
Yeah. And it's also like this is kind of like a somewhat this is somewhat like tangential, but also relates to something Dinesh said, which is like this is kind of is not that significant a point, but he did say something like, you know, Stephen Jay Gould said that religion deals with values and science deals with facts, and so they can really be reconciled. And Dinesh D'Souza is like, but what about miracles? Or he says, like, Dawkins is like, but what about miracles? You know, surely those are factual claims. But it's like, I'm pretty sure like miracle claims, strictly speaking, aren't the only factual claims that like most religions make. Like, it seems like there's a whole host of factual claims that you could appeal to like disagree with that sort of claim.
Yeah, I mean, the universe was created and is ruled by a supernatural entity certainly seems to be a factual claim. You know, for example, like, yeah, that's pretty wild to think that like miracles are the one place that this is gonna there's, you know, that religious claims are going to enter into the domain of facts. And, you know, I mean, also, like, as somebody who likes moral philosophy, you know, I think Gould seeding values, it's like, oh, that's just the territory of religion. You know, let's not try to apply secular reasoning to that. You know, I'm not crazy about either. Although, you know, which is funny because I honestly, overall, I like Stephen Jay Gould a lot more than I like most of the other figures that you just mentioned. I just, you know, I'm just not really sold on that particular argument. All right. So let's switch gears a little bit here. I want to do Jake, do you want to load up the AI one? All right, this one's actually a spicy thing. We might have disagreement here, but it's, can artificial intelligence produce computers that think like humans do?
Yeah, this is Ethan's favorite topic.
We all know that artificial intelligence is used today in all kinds of things. It can compose music. It can write medium level op-eds, but it has all kinds of commercial applications. It's used, for example, in business processing. Obviously, it's capable of astonishing feats of calculation. Now, none of this is particularly new, or by new, I mean it's not new in principle. We've known that there are machines that can do things, there's technology that can do things that human beings can't do. And this has been known for eons, long before the computer. For example, an abacus can calculate perhaps faster than a child or even a human being. And that's been known for centuries. A forklift has strength that human beings don't have. It can lift all kinds of stuff that human beings couldn't dream of lifting, or even a normal calculator can do transactions far more complicated, can multiply giant numbers in seconds, something that, except for a few human savants, a normal person, even an intelligent person, can't do. But the question is, and this has always been the dream of AI, going back now 50 years or about 50 years, can AI function intelligently like a human being? Can artificial intelligence think? Now, when Deep Blue, the computer, was able to beat Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, several years ago, and today, by the way, the best computers can beat any human player, many people thought, oh, well, that's proof computers can think. But it's not really proof of that, because there's a finite number of squares on a board. And even though there's a large number of potential moves, that number is finite. So computers that can do millions or tens of millions or billions of calculations can obviously, through sheer brute calculating force, outplay a human being at chess. Even though there are elements of strategy and creativity involved in chess, those are not good enough to overcome, you may say, brute complex calculation. But in AI labs around the country, the most famous of which the MIT lab, they were always trying to create computers that can function normally, a kind of artificial intelligence system that can operate, for example, like somebody attending a birthday party, in which you could say to the computer, in effect, what's going on here? It's a birthday party. What's going to be served next? Cake. Why are there balloons? Because it's a birthday. So in other words, the computer, quote, understands what that event is about and what's going on in that room. Now, Hubert Dreyfus, the Berkeley philosopher I've been talking about, has a brother who is an applied mathematician at the Rand Corporation. And Rand, which is a government-funded entity, was building this artificial intelligence program. But Hubert Dreyfus's brother went to the head of the Rand Corporation and said, my brother, Hubert Dreyfus, doesn't think this is going to work. And he doesn't think this is going to work for, let's call it, Heideggerian reasons. In other words, the point that Heidegger makes is that we're not thinking beings that are subjects that look at objects and go, oh, there's an object. It has this kind of weight, color, mass. I'm now going to make a representation of that object in my mind. And this is really the model for artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence thinks that it can function like a human mind. Why? Because it thinks that this is what the human mind does. The human mind sort of abstracts itself or pulls itself away from the world, takes a picture of the world out there, names the different objects that are, let's say, in the room, and decides that if that's a balloon and that's a kid with a hat on and a little badge, that's the birthday boy, and everybody else is there to celebrate the birthday party. So you put all these inputs into the computer, and the computer, quote, knows what's going on. But Hubert Dreyfus's point is no computer can ever really do that. And the Rand Corporation was sort of astonished when they heard this. They commissioned this fellow, Hubert Dreyfus, to write a paper that was so devastating that when it was published, Rand decided, we're not going to put our name on it. We're not even going to distribute it. Why? Because they were afraid, Hubert Dreyfus says, that they would lose their government contracts to continue with this research. In other words, what's the point of continuing the research if the funders of the research discover this project is doomed to fail? And kind of the same thing happened at MIT, where they had a big AI lab and they were trying to build computers that work, that think. And they came to Hubert Dreyfus, who was teaching temporarily at MIT for a while, and they told him, hey, Hubert, you know what? You philosophers have been trying to figure out the human mind for 2,000 years, and you've gotten pretty much nowhere. Well, we figured it out. We, the scientists, have beaten you at your own game, and we're making a human mind, which is to say we're making a computer that mirrors the human mind. And again, Hubert Dreyfus goes, that's never going to work. And it's true that in the 70s, of course, the computers were kind of primitive, but the great hope of AI was, listen, as we put more inputs, in other words, not thousands of pieces of information, but hundreds of thousands and millions, maybe even billions, the computer basically becomes a human mind and can think. But again, Dreyfus's point is, for Heideggerian reasons, that will never work. Why? Because we human beings are beings already in the world. We have what can be called a background knowledge of the world that no amount of information fed into a computer can possibly comprehend.
All right, Ethan, you sold?
I don't even know what he was trying to sell me on. It's not even clear.
Yeah, that was really unclear. So I will say Herbert Dreyfus is actually awesome. I'm someone who studies phenomenology in my own academic work, and I would say that Dinesh D'Souza's explanation of what Herbert Dreyfus was up to was totally garbage. And there is like little grains that are true, but I mean, I would say Dreyfus also draws as much on Heidegger as he does on Maurice Merleau-Ponty. And to talk about the importance of embodiment to subjectivity, the importance of the fact that most of our phenomenological experience in the world doesn't have to do with kind of representational experience, but rather our embodiment makes us sort of sensitive to the world habitually in a way that can't really be reduced to kind of propositional knowledge, sort of like the way when you're driving, right? Like you're not rationally thinking and calculating, your kind of body just gets caught up in the act because you have developed through skillful coping a kind of embodied relationship to the world, which kind of computational accounts of representational intelligence can't really take into account. It's been a long time since I've read that essay, and I'm probably not going to be able to explain it clearly, but there's more to it than what D'Souza is.
I think you already did way better than Dinesh, because what I got out of his explanation was computers can't think because of Heidegger.
Yeah, I mean, it was embarrassingly bad. I think the only thing that he said that was kind of right was about representational knowledge, because it's true that I think the way Dreyfus takes up kind of Heideggerian coping with the world and being in the world is that, you know, being an embodied agent is much more related to kind of embodied practical knowledge and less than like kind of representational knowledge, right? Where we build a representation of something in our mind. That's true that Dreyfus does kind of want to go up against what he calls the representationalist account of subjectivity. But the rest is like total ravings. I would agree with you. It doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, most of it just seemed to be like, hey, here's a guy who doesn't think that computers will be able to do this stuff. And, you know, the implication is that you should agree with him, but the most of the reasons why you should agree with him were a little unclear to me. But yeah,
totally unclear. And like, I think, yeah, like the more I'm talking about it, the more I'm kind of remembering that, yeah, the RAND thing was because back then the model of AI was to try to just build a representational model of the world. And then if you can build an accurate enough representational model, then like all of a sudden the AI will be able to think. And I think if that's your model of AI, I think Dreyfus is right. That's not really like the right way of thinking about where intelligence comes from, that there's, you know, more kind of going on there than just representational kind of like propositional knowledge of like facts about the world. But there is kind of an interactive embodied engagement that I think is implicated in intelligence, that like our intelligence in the world is a consequence of our like embodied engagement with the world, or at least there's some important aspect of what makes human intelligence the thing that it is that has to do with our embodiment. That I remember it was a while when I read that paper, I did find convincing.
I mean, it's worth so I guess like one point is like it's hard to consider these kinds of arguments because in large part like the cognitive structure of like AI systems and like how they reason and so on and like what their model of the world looks like, largely we just kind of don't know. We basically just like train AIs through like processes of trial and errors and then create some sort of like inscrutable digital neural network that performs the tasks we want it to perform. But it's not like we have like a worked out digital neuroscience or cognitive science for AIs yet. But I would just say like, yeah, and to the extent that like embodiment really matters, I'm not sure how. I guess I would need to know, like, you know, what Dreyfus's considerations are and stuff in favor of that view. I guess I don't find it that intuitively plausible, like, immediately. But then I would also mention, like, it seems like on that sort of view, like, as long as we in the near future are able to give AIs, like, you know, like sensors and like actuators in some sense, then maybe that counts as like embodiment, and then maybe the argument goes away.
It's possible. I mean, it's possible. You know, that movie Ex Machina, by the way,
Yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, the one of the writers or the writer was actually influenced by Dreyfus in that movie, because like he has a whole bit about how you have to give this AI a body if you want it to be kind of like having a human like intelligence. And he even says, like in the movie, I think there's even something about like some kind of sexual desire element, that like it has to have some kind of like an embodied desiring relationship to the world if you want the intelligence to be comparable to what a human intelligence is like. But I do agree with you, Ethan, that like, you know, the model right now of AI is totally different than trying to in advance give an AI system propositional knowledge about the world, which was what they were trying to do back then. And instead you just kind of give it a training algorithm, and then you give it feedback about like right or wrong, but you have no idea like what right. Like you said, there's not really like a neuroscience of this. It's more just like a trial and error. So I think that's different than what they were trying to do back then, for sure.
Yeah, I do just want to say, by the way, off topic, but I fucking love Ex Machina. That movie doesn't get nearly enough love. It's like the sort of combination of high concept science fiction and being like so ridiculously tightly constructed. It's like a one-act play. Like there are like 3 characters who have speaking lines in the entire movie.
Yeah. And one of them is the AI, I think.
One of them is the AI, exactly.
Yeah.
I really want to watch Ex Machina again now. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I guess, like, I mean, I'm even somebody who, in some sense, should be an easy mark for this argument because I'm not. I mean, skeptical is probably too strong a word, but I mean, like, I am sometimes frustrated by conversations about AI because people just take it. People seem to take it as obvious that like this or that AI breakthrough will happen in the future, and it's not, and it's often not obvious to me, right? That it's like, well, no, I kind of want to hear a little bit more of an argument for why you think that specific thing is going to happen, but Dinesh seems to be doing something different. He seems to be wanting to make an impossibility argument. It's like, no, this is like just innately silly to think that this could happen. And if you're going to make an impossibility argument, I mean, okay, if it's just you need embodiment, then yeah, I mean that doesn't like
yeah.
Okay,
and I got to say too, to be fair, to be like clear about Dreyfus too, I don't think that he was making the impossibility argument either. He was kind of responding to what AI thinkers were doing at the time, and he was taking his knowledge of phenomenology and saying, if you want something that's like a human intelligence, like you need to understand this process of what it's of like the phenomenology of human subjectivity, that it's not all propositional knowledge. But I don't think he was making a strong claim like it's impossible because of this. He's just saying like what they're doing over there at the Rand Corporation, isn't the path. And I think he might have written 2 versions of the book. I think he wrote. I think his book was called like "What Computers Can't Do" or something like that. And then he might have written another one that was like "What Computers Still Can't Do" later in like the 90s or something. And kind of an interesting side fact about Dreyfus is he was actually in the same department as Searle. And they were both kind of writing anti-AI books, but from completely kind of not opposed, but very different traditions, right? Obviously, Searle's extremely analytic philosopher, and obviously Dreyfus is drawing on kind of existential phenomenology to make his argument. But apparently they weren't very friendly, even though they were both kind of on the same team.
Yeah, I mean, I also just wanted to say, like, it's kind of I'm trying to engage with the argument without really knowing exactly what the argument is in much detail, but like, to the extent that the concern is just, it seems unlikely that AI will have a form of intelligence or understanding that's highly analogous to human intelligence understanding. I feel like people who, get worked up about AI, whether that be in a positive direction or in a negative direction, they could just say like, fine, maybe what the AI does is totally disanalogous to human intelligence, but it's just like it's optimizing some algorithm or it's optimizing some utility function in a highly effective way, even though it's not doing it in the same way that humans optimize our utility functions. But like as long as it's doing that and it's doing it effectively, then it seems like AI could have really good or really bad consequences if developed far enough.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.